Hi there, so this is the third video in a series of videos about setting up a CCTV system on an Unraid server. And this part is all about setting up and configuring Shinobi to get everything working. Sounds interesting? Then let's get started. Hi there, so here we are in the third part of the CCTV video series. Now this video isn't quite how I expected it to be when I started it. It's much longer than I was planning. In fact, the video is almost 35 minutes long. Now I did think about splitting it up into multiple parts, but I decided against that and put it all in one long video. Otherwise things just get a bit disjointed. So what I've done in this video is at the bottom of the video I've put a title bar which explains what's going on in each particular part of the video. So if while setting up your CCTV system you need to skip backwards and forwards in the video, hopefully it will make it a little bit easier. Now if you haven't already watched the two previous parts in the CCTV video series, then please just take a moment to watch those if you have time. So in the previous parts we looked at hardware, security and compared some of the CCTV solutions out there. Now some people in the comments thought that my testing wasn't fair. For example, with Blue Iris it can be set to record footage directly to the disk without re-encoding it, and this will make Blue Iris more efficient. However, strangely this feature doesn't work in the demo version of Blue Iris and only works after you've purchased a license. So if you're using Blue Iris it's definitely worth checking that you're recording direct to disk. Also there's other things you can do, such as limiting the amount of frames per second on the live preview video feed. This will save a bit of CPU resources as well. So yes, I'm sure for all of the systems that I tested, there are bound to be various tweaks that can be made which will improve the performance. But my testing was done all with just the default settings, with 4 cameras recording and viewing them at the same time. That's how I use my cameras. I like to have a live feed on all of the time. I don't just use my cameras to review previous events. I like to use them to see when a delivery man's come into the house and to be able to keep an eye on the dogs in the garden, that kind of thing, all from the comfort of my desk. And Shinobi was the top of the bunch when it came to efficiency. Now to those people out there who are using other systems for your CCTV, now I'm not trying to say that the system you've chosen is no good. Hey, if it works for you that's great. It's just that Shinobi was my preferred solution. As with many things in life, there are many different ways to achieve the same result. All software is just a tool to do something. And when it comes to CCTV, my favourite tool to use is Shinobi. I like it because it runs in a Docker container. For me that's a must, because I don't need to run a separate operating system on top of what I'm already running, which straight away not only saves me efficiency on the server, but it also saves me having to buy a Windows 10 license just to have the ability to run said CCTV software. And when I'm running it in a container on my server, I hardly notice that it's running. It has no adverse effects on the performance of other things running on my server. On my server right now, I'm running a macOS VM which I'm using to edit and make this video. And also MB is streaming out media to 2 different users. And everything's running fine. So what else? Shinobi is open source. I like that. And also the Pro version is free for home use. A license is only needed if used in a commercial setting. That's defined as using the software in locations that engage in the buying and selling of goods and services. And also selling the usage of the software. And so for all of us who are setting up CCTV in our own homes, we're not going to have to pay for a license for this. How awesome's that? And in fact there are actually no license keys at all. Shinobi works off a trust-based system. So for me it ticks all of the right boxes, so why not give it a try? So I'm going to head over to my test server and then let's set it up. Okay, so here we are on the server. Now before I go and install a container, I want to prepare a drive which I'm going to use to store the CCTV footage on. I've got 2 drives here and I'm going to use this 1TB drive. At the moment neither of these drives are formatted and I have the unassigned devices plugin installed at the moment. So if I go to settings and then click on unassigned devices, I'm going to set it to destructive mode and click apply and done. And now go back to the main tab and now the option to format the drives is available. So I'm going to format the 1TB drive. I'm going to use XFS and click format, and so now I can use that drive. But before I mount the drive, I'm going to change its name, just to something a bit more user friendly. Okay, I'm going to set it to auto mount because I need it to mount when the array starts, and now just manually mount the drive. Okay, so now if you remember in the second part of the series on CCTV, I recommended to keep the CCTV cameras on a separate network. So let's go and have a look at the network settings on Unraid. Now on my server, I've got two separate network interfaces. Now this interface here is my main interface, which is connected to my router, and so to keep my CCTVs on a separate network, I either need to enable the VLANs here, or I need to plug a separate network cable into the second interface, and then use the cameras on the second NIC. But I'm going to use VLANs because I have a VLAN set up for my cameras already, but to make any changes in the network settings, we're going to have to stop the array. So with the array stopped, we can go back to the network settings, and now I can enable VLANs, so I'm going to set that to yes. And I'm going to add a VLAN, and the VLAN number that I use for my cameras is 50. And for description I'm going to put CCTV, and I don't want to actually assign an IP address to this network, so I'm just going to click apply and done. So with that done, we need to go to the Docker settings here, and you can see here are two additional networks. Now this one here is the VLAN that I just added, that's why it says BR0 then .50, the 50 referring to the VLAN number. Now I want to be able to use this within Docker, so I'm going to tick this here. So we need to put in the network range here, and I've created a VLAN using the network range of 192.168.5.0, and it's a /24 network, and the gateway is going to be 192.168.5.1. Now if you plugged your CCTV cameras into another interface, then you could enable it by enabling this here. So basically, whatever we select here can be used by our Docker containers on the networks that we have ticked. Okay, so now let's click on to done. Now we can start up the array, and we'll be ready to install the container. Okay, so now let's go to the apps tab and do a search for Shinobi. I'm going to install Shinobi Pro, and the first thing I'm going to do, because I have my cameras on a separate network, is I'm going to change the network type here to my VLAN one. Now obviously if you don't have your cameras on a separate network, you wouldn't need to do that. And I'm going to give the container a fixed IP address. I'm going to use 192.168.5.10. And looking at the settings in the container, the web port, we can leave that as is. Now here we can set the username and password for the super user. Now in Shinobi, the super user basically can do anything in Shinobi, and it's used to create other sub-users, etc. So make sure you put a secure username and password for this, much better than what I'm choosing there. And next here for video storage location, this is the location where Shinobi will store the CCTV footage. Now I obviously want this to go onto the unassigned drive that I prepared earlier. So the unassigned disks on Unraid are always under /MNT/disks. There we can see the one I named CCTV. Now there's one other thing to do if we're using unassigned disks, is we need to click onto edit here, and we need to change this access mode from read-write to read-write-slave, and click apply. Now there are some other paths in the container, but we don't need to change them. Basically that's the app data location, and the location for the database which Shinobi uses, and another location here where we can put custom auto-load modules. But we don't need to really worry about that at the moment. Okay, so now let's click on apply and pull down the container. Okay, so now that's installed, let's go to the Docker tab. So once the container is running, let's click onto the log file here and check everything looks fine. And at the bottom here it says Shinobi is ready, so that means we can log into the web UI. Now that will bring us to a login screen here. Now let me just pull the screen down a little bit, and you can see the address here is the IP address and the port number. So after that we need to put a /super, and that will allow us to log in as the super user. So we need to put in the username and password that we had in the template, and click login. Now this allows us to make like a normal user account. So click on to add accounts, and you need to put in an email address and a password. You can choose whether or not to have two-factor authentication. I'm not going to bother myself. And here for storage, this is the max amount of storage that this account can use to store video. Now if I go back to my server and the hard drive I'm recording to is 1 terabyte, so I'm going to use around 900 gigs, and here we have to put the figure in as megabytes, so let's do a conversion. So obviously 900 gigabytes is 900,000 megabytes, so let's pop that in here. And here we can set the default number of days to keep videos. I'm going to have it as 28, and I'm also going to put the same for events and logs as well. Once you've filled that in, just click on to save. Then next go across and click on to configuration. Now it's optional setting this part up. This allows Shinobi to send out emails, and that can be for either two-factor authentication or for sending emails out about notification events. So put in the Gmail email address here. Now if you already have a Gmail account, I suggest you don't actually use your normal account. Set up a new one just for Shinobi to use, and underneath in this part here, just pop in a password for that account. Then after you've done that, click onto the green save bar at the top to save those settings, and then again click save on the bottom left hand corner here. Now there's one extra thing we need to do to allow Shinobi to be able to use the Gmail account to send email. So to do that, we need to head across to Gmail. So there's an email here saying that a sign-in attempt from Shinobi was blocked. So we need to go to the Google account settings and click at the top here, and then go to manage your Google account. On the left hand side click security, and then scroll down, and where you see less secure app access, click onto that, and then toggle allow less secure apps from off to on. And that will allow Shinobi to use the Gmail account. Okay, so we can come out of that now and just go back to the Shinobi configuration settings. So we've finished in here, so now we can click on the log out button, and now we can delete the super from the end of the URL, and then log in with the username and password we created in the last section. And that will bring us straight into the Shinobi dashboard. Now like I said, I don't actually use two-factor authentication myself, but as we've just set up the Gmail account, I'm going to enable it now and then re-log in. So with the two-factor authentication, we're going to have to put in a code here, and Shinobi should have emailed me a code to my personal Gmail account, and we can see it's there. So we just copy that code, then paste it into the box and click authenticate to be able to log in. Now the two-factor authentication is nice to use if you're logging in remotely, giving you an extra layer of security. Okay, so with two-factor authentication, what happens if someone else wants to be able to log in as well? Now you don't want to have to be checking your email and telling them what the codes are. Now remember earlier when we appended to the end of this the /super? Well, if we type in /admin, that will bring us into another login screen that will allow us to create a sub-user off the main user's account. So here we can add additional users to be able to log into the cameras as well. So just add their email address in here and give them a password, then click on to submit to add the user. Now you can add as many sub-accounts as you want to, and you can actually assign different permissions for the sub-accounts. If you click onto the little padlock here, you can do things such as restricting which cameras users can see. At the moment this user can see everything because by default it's the same as the main user. If I was to change this here to no, more options will open, and where you can see can view monitor, now these are the cameras that I'm about to set up in a moment, because due to the magic of editing, I'm filming this part after I've set the cameras up later on. So you just select the cameras to yes, the ones where you want them to be able to view, and the ones you don't want them to view, leave them on no. Okay, so I guess it's time I better show you how to set up these cameras, so let's do that now. So here we are on the Shinobi dashboard, and obviously at the moment it's blank because we have no cameras. So the first thing we're going to do is add a camera, so let's click onto this plus icon here. In Shinobi they're called monitors, and the first section here, identity, we've got the mode here, we've got watch only, which will just view the camera unless any event triggers recording. And we've got record, which will record continuously, and idle, basically it's idle, ready to be used by Shinobi, and disabled, well obviously disabled. I'm going to leave mine on watch only for the time being. For monitor ID, this is just automatically generated, so I'm going to leave it as is. And the name here, this is where we can name the camera, so I'm going to call this side garden. Then next here we've got the number of days to keep videos. If we leave this blank, then it's going to use the default that we set up for the user. And notes here, we can put notes about the camera. Obviously that's optional whether you want to do that. Storage location, we want to leave it on default. Now we come down to connection, and this is where we put the URL of our camera. Now under input type, you basically want to choose the output type that your camera does. And for my camera, the H.264, H.265 is what I need. But before we go ahead and fill out anything else, let's go across and log into the camera's web UI. So I'm going to log into the web UI, And here's the camera on the side of my house. So we're going to click onto configuration. And so what you want to do in the web UI of your camera is just to set everything how you want it to be. You can change things like the brightness here and that kind of thing. You can choose your power frequency, 60 or 50 Hz. In the UK we're on 50 Hz. And now I'm going to go onto video here and I'm going to change the encode mode from H.265 to H.264. Now for me I can't really get H.265 working correctly, but H.264 works absolutely fine. Now the resolution, here we can choose various different resolutions. I'm going to leave mine on 1080p. And for the frame rate, well, I don't really need 20 frames a second. I'm going to pop that down to 15. And next we've got bitrate type, we've got VBR and CBR. Well, VBR stands for variable bitrate and CBR stands for constant bitrate. Now less data will be transferred if you use VBR, so that's what I'm going to use for mine. But if you find you've got kind of like smearing on the picture, setting it to CBR will help that kind of issue. Now for quality, by default here you can see it's set for good, which is pretty much in the middle. I find even if I click it onto worser, is there such a word, I don't know, then the picture actually looks just the same to me. But basically this quality changes the bitrate here, which I think is only applicable if you're using CBR. So I'm just going to leave mine on good anyway. Now you'll notice here we've got a mainstream and we've got a substream. So for the substream I'm going to put things pretty much the same. I'm going to use H.264. The resolution I'm going to leave it at 640 by 360. The frame rate I'm going to drop this actually to 10 here. And the last setting we can see here is something called frame interval. So frame interval, what exactly is this? Well, it's also called a keyframe, and it's how often a whole completed frame is captured. Now this might sound strange, but with video compression a whole frame isn't captured each time. We have a reference frame which has the whole image. Then the next frames only contain the data of what's changed in the image since the last whole keyframe, until the next keyframe comes along. And this setting here allows us to choose how often the keyframe is recorded. So if your CCTV camera is pointing to an area where things don't change very often, then you can choose a larger number here. But if the camera is pointing on an area which is busy, it might be better to choose a lower number. So at the moment looking here, I get a whole keyframe every 60 frames. And I'm recording at 15 frames per second. So 60 divided by 15 is 4, so every 4 seconds I'm going to get a full keyframe. Okay, so what I think I'm actually going to do is to raise my frame rate back up to 20 frames per second. But I'm going to lower the frame interval down to 20, so that now will give me 1 keyframe each second. Now generally, the picture quality of recorded footage will be better with lower frame intervals. But really this is quite subjective, so it's really worth experimenting with different figures and seeing what you prefer. Lower frame intervals will normally cause more bandwidth to be used, so obviously resulting in larger file sizes of the recorded footage. Now there is actually an exception to this. If you had your key frame rate set really high, for example let's say you'd set your key frame rate to say, I don't know, 150, if there's very little movement then yes this would be okay and it wouldn't use a lot of bandwidth because the subsequent frames will be pretty much exactly the same as the ones previously, so very little data will be written. But if your camera is pointed to an area where it's really busy, then every subsequent frame is probably going to be different to the keyframe. So each new frame will be comparing itself against the keyframe, so there'll be a whole load of data written because things are so different. Anyway, it's really important that you experiment with this and just find out what's the best picture quality for you. Don't just copy what I've done because it may well not be good for you at all. However, every time you do make a change, look at some of the recorded footage that you're creating and also look at the live feed footage as well and see what you think is going to be best and make the figures work for you. So obviously each brand of camera will be slightly different, but most cameras will have very similar settings to what we have here. So that's enough for the camera settings inside the camera. Now let's go back across to the Shinobi web UI. Right, so back on the Shinobi page, we're going to have to find out the full URL path of our camera. Now there's 2 ways to do this. We can head across over to shinobi.video/docs/cameras and look up our make and model of camera there. Now my camera is an SV3C make and I can't find it here in the list. But for example, if you had something like a Swan camera, you can just look that up and find out the correct URL. But like I said, there are actually two ways to do this, and in fact the second way is much easier. Now that list of camera URLs we were just looking at is actually basically a copy of the URL list from iSpy Connect. And for those of you that don't know, iSpy is actually some CCTV software that runs on Windows. And the iSpy software has actually got a great wizard built into it which will find out the URLs of our cameras. So I'm going to go back over to my server and go to the VMs tab, and here I've got a Windows 10 VM. And so I'm going to download and install the iSpy software on this VM so I can find out the URL of my cameras. Now of course you don't have to use a Windows VM, you can use a real Windows machine to do this, but one thing you have to make sure of is Windows is connected to the same network that the cameras are on. So because this is a VM, I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to change the network bridge to be on the same network which I have Shinobi on and also the cameras. So for me that's my VLAN, which was BR0.50. So now I'm going to start up Windows and install the software. Okay, so here I am on iSpyConnect.com. I'm going to click onto download here, and I'm going to choose to download the iSpy 64-bit. Now I'm sure there's some people out there who may be thinking, hey, I shouldn't have to do this, Shinobi should have this all built in. Oh yes, it'd be nice if we could do this all from the interface of Shinobi itself. But iSpy is an open source piece of software that we can download for free, and so we can use this as a tool just to get the URLs for our cameras really easily. And anyone who's using Unraid can easily install a Windows VM. You don't even need to have a license for Windows, you can download the ISO from Microsoft and install it without having to put in a license key. Yeah, it might nag you to activate Windows, but you can still use it long enough to do this. Okay, so with the software installed now let's carry on. So here on the web UI, let's just click on to add a camera, and then we're going to choose IP camera with wizard. This is the tool that we can use to get the URL. Now we can type in the make of our camera here, and I'm going to type in mine, which is SV3C. And my camera is the SV3C camera, the 1080p, but you can just put not listed if you can't find your camera in the list, and click next. And here we just put in the default username and password for the camera. Mine's admin and 123456. And just click on to next, and then scan local network. And then from the list of what it finds, highlight the IP of the camera which you want to discover the URL of, and then click next. And this will start generating a list of possible URLs which you can try for your camera. But because this camera is an ONVIF camera, I'm going to choose this one here, and click next. And this has brought up two URLs for two different streams. Now if you remember when I was configuring the camera, I had a main stream and I had a sub stream. These two URLs are for each of those, and I'm going to use the 1080p stream here. We can see the URLs working because the camera shows. Now I'm quickly going to go back to the camera configuration, and I'm going to set up another user so I don't have to use the default one. I'm going to add a user called Shinobi with the password of Shinobi as well. So with that done, let's use the URL and add the camera. So now I'm going to type in the URL, but instead of using the default username and password, I'm going to use the username and password that I just created in the last step. So now let's press save and test if the camera works. Okay, so there it is. So let's stretch this to make it a little bit bigger, and let's go back into the settings again. And you see this part here where it says automatic yes. Well, if we change this now to no, then basically it's broken down the URL into its various components. So should the automatic setting not get everything quite right, you can make little manual tweaks here. So I'm just going to pop it back across onto yes, and if we scroll down now, down to where we see monitor capture rate, and here in the input section, let's leave these two settings here as is, and then where it says monitor capture rate, here we want to put in the frames per second that our camera is outputting. Now I'd set my camera to 20 frames per second, so I'm going to pop that in there. And here accelerator, we can enable hard drive acceleration for things such as Intel QuickSync and Nvidia hardware acceleration. I haven't tried this myself, but if you wanted to try passing through an Nvidia graphics card, then you could use the Unraid Nvidia, the plugin from Linux server that allows you to install a modified Unraid version, complete with the Nvidia drivers. But I'm going to leave this as is. Okay, so let's move down onto this setting here where it says stream. Now this section is the settings whereby we set them for how the actual video is streamed out onto the dashboard. And this setting here, stream type, I find the default Poseidon works really well, but there is one reason why you might want to change this. If you're going to be viewing the cameras remotely through a reverse proxy and you're going to be using an iPhone, then unfortunately an iPhone can't actually view a Poseidon screen. So in that case, if you're using an iPhone, you should change it to HLS here. However, I'm using Android and I don't use an iPhone, so I'm going to leave mine on Poseidon. And here from connection type we can choose from WebSocket and HTTP. I'm leaving mine on WebSocket, but if you notice, if you actually change it to HLS, that option actually disappears anyway. Okay, so video codec. I find it best to leave it on copy, but you can choose other codecs here to stream out the video. And next, audio codec. I've got mine on no audio because I'm not streaming out any audio. If you were streaming audio as well, then I would say leave that on to copy. Everything else here we can leave as is. And now coming down to this section here, time-lapse, this is a really cool feature. If we click onto this here and enable it, then we can basically create time-lapse footage from our cameras. So creation interval, I'm going to pick every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes my camera is going to save a frame which can be used for time-lapse viewing. Now here we can choose the image width and image height. I'm going to keep mine fairly small, 640 by 480. And here under recording watermark, you can choose to put a watermark on your video if you want to. I'm not going to bother. And so with that done, let's scroll right down to the bottom. We're going to leave everything as default for the time being and click on to save. Okay, so now I'm going to cut to where I've added my other 3 cameras and click on each one on the left hand side here to add it to the dashboard. Now obviously it's night time here where I'm adding the cameras, that's why everything's black and white. And now I'm just going to move around the pictures and set them up on the screen how I like them. That's one thing I really like about Shinobi, is you can basically resize any camera and put it where you like. And you can make the picture of one camera bigger than another, and you know, it's really quite customizable. Now the 2 cameras you can see here with the really kind of bad picture with the kind of white glare on it, basically those are dome cameras, but right in front of them there's a really bright street light that comes on in the night. And then the light from the street light hits the plastic dome and it kind of diffuses or refracts out and gives a bleached out picture. So I'm thinking I'm going to change these cameras for the bullet style ones, which have a kind of like peak over them, which should block this glare out. Well, hopefully it will. Because generally I'm quite happy with how these cameras pick things up in the dark. If we zoom in there, look, we can see my silly dog outside. In fact, I better go and let her back in. Okay, anyway, that's the end of adding and viewing cameras. Now let's do one of the most important things, which is recording footage. So remember when we first added the camera earlier in the video, and we set it to watch only. Well, obviously if you want to record constantly, you'd set it to record. But we're going to set up some motion detection now. So we want to have the camera on watch only, because it will only record then when it detects motion. So I'm going to set up some motion detection on the front camera here. So let's go onto it and click onto the camera and click the spanner icon. Then on the left hand side in the list, let's click global detector settings. And we want to change this to enabled yes. So let's leave all the other settings here as is, but let's change save events to SQL to yes. Let's leave detector rate to the default of 2. And down a little bit further we'll see the image feed in width and height. Now leave that on 640 by 480. It doesn't need to be the full resolution of your camera because it's only used to actually detect the motion and has no reflection on what resolution is going to be recorded. On how to record, leave it on traditional watch only. Trigger record, you want that set to yes because that will set the camera recording if it detects some motion. And how long you want the camera to actually record for, we set this here in the recording timeout. I'm going to change mine to 5 minutes. Now I'm going to leave all of the other settings as default now, but in these settings you can set things such as whether you want an email alert when motion's detected. I really can't be bothered to have an email every few seconds if someone walks past the house. So with that done, before moving on, I'm just going to click on to save and then just go straight back into the settings again. And then now looking down into the motion detection section, we want to make sure we've got use built in set to yes. And here under indifference you can leave that as is, but I'm going to change mine to 1. And trigger threshold, color threshold I'm going to leave as is, but I'm going to change full frame detection, I'm going to change that to yes. And here you can see a setting called noise filter, and you can toggle this on and off if you want to try and get rid of any noise in the picture so it isn't detected as motion. I'm actually going to leave this turned off. So with all of those settings put in now, I'm going to click on this button here called region editor, and I'm going to click on the green plus icon at the top here to be able to map out a region where I want to detect motion in. Now I'm going to speed this bit up a bit because it's a bit fiddly. You basically just click on any part of the line and you can drag it out and make little points and map everywhere where you want it to be. And wherever the red polygons are, that's the area where motion will be detected, and that will trigger the recording. So once you're happy with it, click on the close button and then make sure you click on save. Okay, so that camera will now start recording for 5 minutes at a time every time motion's detected in one of those zones that I mapped out. And once there's been some motion recorded, we can click on this little icon here and we can go to this viewer. Or if we close this, another way of viewing it is we can click on this kind of calendar icon here and we can see the motion events written down on a calendar. And then you can just click to different points on the timeline bar to see basically what you've recorded. Okay, so let's close this window and close the calendar. Okay, so now let's have a look at how to view the time-lapse footage. We need to click on this little arrow here. That brings up the time-lapse interface. We can choose which camera we want to look at the time-lapse from and the date range, and you just click on download. That compiles all the footage together in a little video file. You can actually change the frames per second with this slider before you do the download as well. I left mine at 30 frames a second. Now remember, I set mine to once every 5 minutes, so 30 frames a second will be 30 times 5 minutes every second, which is 2.5 hours per second. And let's just open up the video. And it's quite cool, you can see day and night happening and various things happening. I really like this. I'd actually like to set it to record 1 frame per hour and then see what it's like after a year. I think that would be quite cool. Now let's just have a look at how we can kind of customize the dashboard a bit and make things a little different. Okay, so now click on the kind of email address at the top left and we can see various options here. Let's click onto settings and go down to preferences. Here we can change the look of the dashboard. We can change things such as the default monitors per row, and we can change the actual theme to a different theme. After you've done it, you have to refresh the page, and there we have like a nice blue theme with 1 camera per row. Okay, so there's a few things you can do to change the look of the dashboard to your liking. Okay, so we're almost done, but how are we going to view these cameras remotely? Well, there's 2 ways to do this. Now the best and the most secure way is to use a reverse proxy. And the other way, the less secure way, is just to forward port 8080 through from your router to the IP address of the Shinobi Docker container. And the way I'm going to show you to do it is setting it up through the reverse. Now I'm not going to show you how to set up a reverse proxy here. If you want to know how to do that, then please see my other video here. Okay, so here we are over on my main server where my main Shinobi container is running. And that's its IP address of the container here. So we need to remember the IP address and the port number that the container is running on. Then we want to head over to our app data folder and then look there for the Let's Encrypt folder, and then navigate to the Nginx folder, and then finally the proxy configs folder. Now by default you're not going to find a Shinobi configuration file here. You're going to have to make your own. And this here is what it should look like. Now this part here where it says Shinobi, you will have had to make a CNAME on your domain to reflect this. And here on the line where it says proxy pass, this IP address is the IP address and the port number that your Shinobi container is running on. Now that's the only 2 things you need to change in this file, and then save the file with the name shinobi.subdomain.conf. Now you'll find this sample reverse proxy config file linked in the description of this video. And once you've made and saved your configuration file, you're just going to have to restart the Let's Encrypt container for it to take effect. Oh yeah, and also one thing, the reverse proxy only seems to work when proxying through to the Shinobi Pro container and doesn't seem to work with the Community Edition. Whoa, okay, well I think that's going to be it. I'm going to wrap it up now. There's a whole load more things that Shinobi can do, and if any of you guys have got any tips on what you're doing and how you're using Shinobi, then please share it with us in the comments below. And sorry this video is so long, hopefully I've managed to explain everything fairly straightforwardly, and it will help you get your CCTV system all set up and configured. Well, before I go, I just want to give a really big thanks to all of my patrons and supporters out there. Guys, thank you very much for all of your support. If it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be able to make these videos, and I really appreciate all of your help. And for anyone who wants to join these great bunch of people, then you can find links in the description below. And if you like this video, as always, please hit that like button, it really does help the channel. And if you think anyone else would like this video, then please share it with them too. Anyway guys, it's time for me to go now, but whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good, and I'll catch you in the next video.